Hey guys, it is March 24th, and I'm going to go over the best possible answers to Assignment 2 and Assignment 3. If you haven't turned it in by now, it's late, so I don't really mind going over all the answers so everybody else can have them. So one says, why is a food web better than a food chain as a way to describe a community? Well, if you think about a food chain, let me back the camera up a little bit here. It would be one individual path, right? So I could say leaves are eaten by a rabbit. A rabbit could be eaten by, well, this one actually isn't particularly good. But maybe, maybe leaves are eaten by a rabbit, rabbit's eaten by a fox, the end. Right? It's one individual path that energy can take through an ecosystem. Whereas a food web is showing lots and lots of organisms and who eats who, and it just more accurately reflects the complexity that an ecosystem has. 2, as a number of insects declines in the autumn, as the leaves fall from trees and the grass stops growing, what would you expect to happen to bird populations? I was actually really impressed with some of your answers for this one. You said, they would migrate to somewhere that part of the year where the climate is better. But really all you needed to say is, as there is less insects, there will also be less birds. We would expect the population in that area to go down. Yes, they might just migrate, but in that area, the population would definitely have to go down. Then we go to page 336, and we just had to do 4 on this page. It says, what is the difference between a habitat and a niche? So remember, habitat is the place. It is the surroundings of the organism, where it is doing what it does, where it is living its life. And the niche is its job or its role. So that can include a lot of things. So habitat, remember, is just the space, but, let's think about a lion maybe, because there's a picture of a lion on this page. So the habitat of the niche is the savanna, the habitat of the lion is the savanna. It's this, tropical grassland. Its niche would be, it is helping to control prey populations. It's feeding on grazers, it's feeding on all kinds of things. Its niche would be, say top predator, keep other prey populations, predator populations controlled as well. So again, it's where it's doing what it does and what it is doing in its habitat. All right, and then we skip all the way to page 342. We had to do 5 and 8 here. So 5 was, what do parasites, commensal organisms, and mutualistic organisms have in common? How are they different? I had a lot of pretty strangely phrased answers to this one that I bet if you had reread it, you would have been like, does that make sense though? So what do they have in common? Parasites, commensal organisms, and mutualistic organisms all have in common that they rely on another organism. Or you could say that there's, a close relationship between organisms. That's what they have in common. They are different because in a parasitic relationship, one organism is benefiting and the other is harmed. In a commensal relationship, one's benefiting and the other is not affected. And in mutualistic, they are both benefiting. Both organisms are benefiting. I just had a lot of people skipping words that would make the sentence make sense. So do me a favor and always read through your answer before you hit submit and make sure, does this sentence make sense? And last question of assignment 2, in what way are predators and parasites similar in the way they interact with species? Well, they're similar because they're both hurting another organism, right? So a predator really hurts them to the point that they kill them, and that's how it's different. So a predator is going to kill their prey right away because they're going to eat it after they kill it. A parasite is going to harm it slowly over time. Okay, it might eventually kill its host, but that's usually not its goal. If you think about a parasite, the longer it keeps its host alive, the longer it has a constant source of food, right? So they both hurt the other organisms, but predators are going to kill them right away. Parasites are going to kind of slowly make them less and less healthy and might result in their death. All right, and then we have assignment 3. It starts right here on page 364. How does primary succession differ from secondary succession? Well, in primary succession, you're starting from nothing. Okay, you're starting from bare rock. There's no life, there's no soil, no nothing. Okay, secondary succession, we had some event that changed the environment, but the soil was left behind. Okay, so in secondary succession, we're starting from soil. You also could have said primary succession. If we look back at the picture here, their scale for primary succession is hundreds of years. It's very, very slow because it takes a long time for rock to become soil. That's the part that takes a really, really long time. Whereas in secondary succession, it's much, much faster. Basically, in secondary succession, we'd be starting right here. Okay, and this would be much, much faster. So you could have answered also with how long it takes, but the main idea is this one starts from rock and secondary starts from soil. 16, how does a climax community differ from a successional community? Climax community is basically done. Okay, it is done with succession. It has reached the peak of the most, complicated food webs and the most biodiversity it's going to get. A successional community is kind of a stage on the way of succession. Okay, so again, if we kind of look back at this picture, here's the climax community. This is what's happening when this particular area is done. All of these communities previous would be considered successional communities. They're still communities. They've got living things there, but they're going to eventually be replaced. Right? They're just part of the succession. They're not the end result. That's the climax community. 17, describe the steps in secondary succession of abandoned farmland to a climax community. So you'd have abandoned farmland, grasses would start to grow because you've already got soil, right? So you can go straight to grasses and then shrubs, and then if the climate is right, you can eventually have trees starting to grow, and when trees start to grow, if they're densely packed, then the grasses would actually probably die because they don't get enough sunshine. 18, describe the steps in succession of a pond to a climax community. So this one also has a nice picture at the bottom of this page. Yeah, succession of a pond to a wet meadow. So I had a lot of you literally write that, which is fine. But you've got a pond. So ponds by definition are pretty shallow. Okay, so you're going to have grasses and things starting to grow. And as they grow, right, they're going to grow and live and die. And when they die, they're going to build up their remains on the bottom. And so it's going to get shallower and shallower and shallower until you basically have a grassy meadow, which could eventually become a forest. Let's see here. 19, describe 3 important factors that determine the kind of climax community that will develop in an area. There's 2 kind of like obvious ones, which would be temperature and precipitation, which if you just put climate, you're cheating yourself, because I would always split that into 2 if we're trying to get to 3. But so temperature and precipitation would be 2. For the third one, you could have said the kinds of seeds available. You could have said proximity to a, other ecosystem. Like, is it possible that it's close to somewhere that's already developed and things could just kind of wander in and start growing? So there were a lot of really great answers for that one as I was grading stuff. And last 2 here. Why do DDT and PCBs increase in concentration in the bodies of organisms at higher trophic levels? So this, again, we're going to look at this picture here. So this is called biomagnification. And so these are substances that have been introduced by people into ecosystems. Okay, and so they're going to be taken up in really small concentrations by these plants and plankton, things that are, taking their nutrients right out of the soil or right out of the water. Okay, think about this. If you're this fish right here, in its lifetime, it's going to eat a ton of plankton. Okay, so these substances do not break down once they are consumed. So all of the, we'll use DDT, all the DDT that's in all of the plankton that this fish eats in its entire life are going to be in this fish. Okay, so think thousands and thousands of plankton. So all of that DDT is going to build up in this fish. And then you go up another level. Here's this bird, okay, Lee's tern, or common tern. So it's going to eat lots of fish in its lifetime. So all of the DDT that's built up in this fish from eating all of those plankton, if this guy eats lots of these fish, it's going to have even more of this substance built up. So the reason is we are introducing these substances, and the reason that they are sustained is because they're fat soluble rather than water soluble. So they can't excrete them in urine or waste. They store in the fat tissues and they just stay there forever. What's the most common form of habitat destruction practiced by humans? I had several different answers, as long as your answer made sense. I didn't really care if it was the most common. But urbanization was one, which is, building cities and things. Producing farmland where there was once a more robust habitat for wildlife, or deforestation were all really good answers I had for that one. And 22, list 3 introduced species that have become pests and explain why they become pests. If you were using just your book to get answers, you probably would have gone with, trying to remember where they were here, cows and some grasses and pigs. Oh yeah, they talked about them on page 365 here, under introduced species. But I had also a lot of people talk about just ones that they know or ones that they research, like the rabbits in Australia that we talked about a lot last year in biology. But there's a million examples of humans introducing species. And why do they become pests? The main answer is why they become pests is they might not have a natural predator in that ecosystem. And so if there's no predator, they're just going to reproduce and reproduce. And then when a population gets really big, it can become very bad. So that is the answers to that. I'll post the answers to the review probably tomorrow or Thursday. Probably tomorrow since we're having our test Thursday. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.